The screen at the tech conference flashed my name in bold letters as the winner of the Innovator of the Year award. My phone immediately lit up with notifications, congratulatory messages, interview requests, and a text from my mother that simply read, "Is this real?" 20 years of being known as Emma's less academic sister had culminated in this moment. My algorithm had just revolutionized sustainable energy distribution, and suddenly, the Martinez family had two geniuses instead of one. Except I wasn't the overnight success they thought I was. I had been building toward this moment for years while they were busy framing Emma's diplomas. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the weight of the Innovation Award in my hands, cool metal against my sweating palms as camera flashes temporarily blinded me. The applause was deafening, yet somehow I could still hear the echo of my father's voice from our last family dinner. "Alex, maybe tech isn't your thing. Your sister was coding before she could ride a bike." The irony wasn't lost on me. My sister Emma, with her 3 degrees from MIT, had always been the genius of the Martinez family. I was the creative one, which was just my parents' polite way of saying I wasn't measuring up academically. But standing on that stage in Seattle's Innovation Center, watching investors and industry leaders rise to their feet, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. The algorithm I'd spent 4 years developing in relative obscurity had just been recognized as the breakthrough the renewable energy sector had been waiting for. The host's voice brought me back to reality. Alexandra Martinez has created what experts are calling the most significant advancement in energy distribution efficiency this decade. Alex, would you like to say a few words? I stepped toward the microphone, my designer pantsuit suddenly feeling too tight. The speech I had prepared seemed inadequate, so I set it aside. I scanned the audience until I found them. My parents, and Emma, seated near the back. Their expressions a mixture of shock and something I hadn't seen directed at me before. Pride tinged with confusion. "Thank you," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "This recognition means more than I can express, especially because innovation isn't always about being the smartest person in the room. Sometimes it's about seeing the problem differently." I paused, meeting Emma's gaze. "I'd like to thank my family, especially my sister Emma, whose brilliance always gave me something to aspire to." The words tasted bittersweet. While sincere, they carried the weight of countless dinners where my parents had extolled Emma's academic achievements while my projects went unmentioned. Years of Emma's in the gifted program and Emma's skipping another grade. Years of being introduced as our other daughter at faculty parties. After the ceremony, we gathered at the hotel restaurant for a celebration dinner. My father ordered champagne, an unprecedented gesture for someone who believed celebrations were reserved for real accomplishments, like Emma's multiple graduations. My mother kept glancing at her phone, where notifications about news articles featuring my name continued to pour in. "Channel 5 wants an interview," she announced, her voice laced with disbelief. "The Seattle Times is running a feature." "Alex, how did you—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought that lingered unspoken. "When did you become someone worth noticing?" Emma, to her credit, seemed genuinely pleased. "I always knew you were brilliant in your own way," she said, squeezing my hand under the table. It was a kind gesture, but the qualifier stung. Brilliant in my own way still suggested a hierarchy, her conventional academic intelligence versus my supposedly lesser practical skills. "What happens now?" my father asked, cutting to the practical matters as always. "Will you sell the algorithm? Start a company?" "I already have a company, Dad," I replied, watching his eyebrows rise. "Verdant Systems. We've been operating for 2 years. This award is just the first public recognition of what we've been building." 2 years? my mother's voice pitched higher. But you never said anything. I smiled, the same practiced smile I'd worn through childhood piano recitals while Emma competed in national science fairs. I mentioned it several times. At Christmas dinner last year, I talked about securing our first round of funding. The blank looks on their faces confirmed what I had always known. They hadn't been listening. Their silence now was deafening, filled with the realization that while they had been focused on Emma's academic career, I had been quietly building something revolutionary. As dinner wrapped up, my phone rang. A reporter from Tech Innovations Monthly wanting an exclusive. As I excused myself to take the call, I caught a glimpse of my father leaning toward Emma, likely seeking her expertise to understand exactly what I had accomplished. Old habits died hard. Back in my hotel room that night, I gazed out at Seattle's skyline, the lights of the city mirroring the sparkling possibilities ahead. The award sitting on my nightstand was more than recognition. It was vindication. And yet, a part of me still craved something the award couldn't give me. My parents' understanding that I hadn't just gotten lucky, that I wasn't just smart for someone who struggled in school, that my path, different as it was from Emma's, had always been intentional. I opened my laptop to find my inbox flooded with congratulatory emails, partnership offers, and investment opportunities. This was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the real work would start. The Martinez family's perception of me might have changed overnight, but the foundation for this moment had been years in the making. And as I drafted responses to the most promising contacts, I realized I was grateful for one thing: that no one had ever expected me to succeed. It had allowed me to build something extraordinary without the weight of expectation. Part 2. The Foundation and Journey. My journey to that award-winning moment began long before I founded Verdant Systems or created my algorithm. It started in the shadow of my sister's brilliance, in the quiet corners of our childhood home in Ridgeview, a small town where academic achievement was the primary currency of value. Emma was reading by age 3, solving complex equations by 8, and had skipped 2 grades by the time she reached high school. I, on the other hand, struggled with traditional learning. Numbers seemed to dance across the page, refusing to stay in place. While Emma's teachers suggested advanced placement, mine recommended testing for learning disabilities. The diagnosis came when I was 12, dyslexia with a side of ADHD. My parents received the news with poorly disguised disappointment. "We just don't understand," my mother said to the specialist, as if I weren't sitting right there. Emma never had these issues. That comparison became the soundtrack of my adolescence. Why can't you apply yourself like Emma? Emma never needed reminders about homework. Emma managed to get straight A's while playing violin. Each comparison drove home a single message. I was the defective Martinez. What my family never understood was that I processed information differently, not worse. While Emma excelled in linear thinking, I saw patterns and connections that others missed. My room was filled with disassembled electronics that I would rebuild with modifications. I created solutions to household problems that no one had noticed needed solving. But these skills weren't measured on standardized tests, so they went, largely unacknowledged. College admissions season brought the contrast into sharp focus. Emma had been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship at 16. I applied to state schools with solid engineering programs, but without the prestigious names my parents had hoped for. When the University of Washington offered me admission with a modest scholarship based on my portfolio of inventions rather than my GPA, my father's response was telling. Well, it's something. Seattle became my escape. Far from the constant comparisons, I found myself thriving in classes that valued creative problem-solving over memorization. Professor James Wilson's sustainable engineering course changed everything. While other professors saw my unconventional approaches as problematic, he recognized their potential. "You have a unique way of seeing problems, Alex," he told me after I presented a redesign of a solar panel distribution system that challenged industry standards. Most engineers try to solve the problem in front of them. You solve problems others haven't even identified yet. Under his mentorship, I began to develop the core concepts that would eventually become my award-winning algorithm. The basic premise was revolutionary yet simple. Energy distribution didn't need to follow the centralized model that had dominated for decades. With the right algorithmic approach, renewable energy could be distributed through a more responsive, adaptive network that minimized waste and maximized efficiency. My senior project caught the attention of a small green tech incubator. While my classmates accepted traditional job offers, I took a risk and joined the incubator with my fledgling concept. The salary was minimal, something my parents couldn't understand when compared to Emma's six-figure starting position at a prestigious research institution. "You have a degree now," my mother lamented during one of our monthly calls. "Why waste it on some startup pipe dream?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Those early years were lean and challenging. I shared a cramped apartment with two other entrepreneurs, pouring every spare dollar into developing prototypes. When the incubator's funding period ended, most projects folded, but I remained convinced of my concept's viability. I took night shifts coding for established tech companies to fund my daytime work on what I now called the Adaptive Distribution Network. The breakthrough came during a particularly grueling period when I hadn't slept, more than 4 hours a night for weeks. I was mapping energy consumption patterns across different geographical regions when I noticed something the existing models had missed. Consumption didn't just fluctuate based on time and season, but also followed subtle social patterns that could be predicted and accommodated with the right algorithm. That insight became the cornerstone of my approach. While conventional systems treated energy consumers as static variables, I recognized them as dynamic participants in an evolving ecosystem. My algorithm didn't just distribute energy, it anticipated needs and adapted in real time. When I secured my first significant investment from a venture capital firm specializing in green technology, I called my parents with the news. My father's first question was whether Emma had reviewed my business plan. She hadn't. Her expertise was in theoretical physics, not energy distribution or entrepreneurship. But the question underscored how firmly they believed my success must somehow be dependent on her intelligence rather than my own. Verdant Systems grew steadily over the next 2 years. We moved from the incubator to a proper office space in downtown Seattle. Our team expanded from just me to 15 dedicated engineers and developers. Early implementations of our system in small municipal grids showed promising results. Energy waste reduced by 34%, cost savings of nearly 28%. Through it all, I maintained a careful separation between my professional and family lives. During holiday visits home, I shared simplified versions of my progress, learning to expect the polite nods and quick transitions to Emma's latest research publication or grant approval. I stopped looking for validation where it wouldn't be found and instead channeled that energy into perfecting my work. The invitation to present at the Northwestern Innovation Summit came unexpectedly. The selection committee had reviewed early data from our municipal implementations and wanted me to showcase the technology. It wasn't until later that I learned Emma had been originally invited to speak about theoretical applications of quantum computing to energy problems, but had recommended me instead, her first acknowledgement that my work might be worthy of serious attention. The summit changed everything. Representatives from major energy companies and government agencies attended my presentation. The questions afterward weren't skeptical, but excited. How soon could we scale? What were the implementation requirements? Had we considered international applications? 3 months later, a pilot implementation in Portland demonstrated results that exceeded even our projections. Energy waste dropped by nearly 40%, grid resilience improved significantly, and cost savings approached 35%. The data was undeniable, and suddenly, Verdant Systems was being mentioned in major tech publications. When the nomination for the Innovator of the Year award arrived, I almost dismissed it as aspirational. The field would surely include industry veterans with decades of experience. Emma, visiting Seattle for a conference of her own, was the one who convinced me to attend the ceremony. "You've earned the recognition," she said over coffee near my office. "Even if you don't win, being nominated puts Verdant on the map." It was perhaps the first time she had spoken to me as a peer rather than as a big sister humoring my latest project. I didn't tell her how much that shift meant, how the acknowledgement from her felt in some ways more significant than any industry award could be. The night of the ceremony, I didn't truly expect to win. I sat between my parents and Emma, feeling strangely like a child again despite leading a company of now 28 employees. When they announced my name, Emma was the first to react, squeezing my arm so hard it almost hurt. "They called you," she whispered, her voice a mixture of surprise and pride. "Yes," I thought as I made my way to the stage. They finally called me. Part 3. The Strategic Response. The morning after the award ceremony, I woke to find my face on the business section of the Seattle Times. "Alexandra Martinez, the unassuming revolutionary changing how we power our future," the headline declared. My phone had died overnight from the constant notifications, LinkedIn connections, Twitter mentions, email alerts. When I plugged it in and it finally rebooted, there were 17 missed calls, including 3 from my father. My parents had extended their stay in Seattle, supposedly to support me during this exciting time, though I suspected they were also trying to process this new reality where their other daughter was suddenly newsworthy. We agreed to meet for brunch at a cafe near my apartment in Capitol Hill. I arrived deliberately early, wanting a few moments of calm before facing them. The cafe had become my second office during Verdant's early days. The baristas knew my order and had watched me evolve from a solo entrepreneur working on a worn laptop to the CEO who occasionally brought her team for planning sessions at the large corner table. My parents entered precisely on time, my father scanning the space with the slightly disapproving expression he reserved for establishments that weren't quite polished enough for his taste. Emma followed behind them, engrossed in something on her phone. "There's my genius," my father announced loudly enough that several nearby patrons looked up. It was a term he had only ever applied to Emma before, and the unfamiliarity of it directed at me made me wince. "Good morning," I said, rising to accept their hugs. "I ordered coffee for everyone." As we settled into our seats, I noted how my mother's eyes kept darting to other patrons, as if checking whether they recognized me. My father immediately launched into questions about the financial implications of the award. "The recognition must be attracting investors," he said, stirring his coffee with unnecessary vigor. "Have you considered how to leverage this? Emma mentioned that with the right strategy, you could significantly increase your company's valuation." Of course, Emma had advised him. I glanced at my sister, who at least had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I just thought they should understand the business side," she explained, "since they've never been involved in startups." "Verdant was valued at $48 million during our last funding round 3 months ago," I stated calmly, watching my father's eyebrows climb toward his hairline. "After yesterday's award and this morning's press, we've already received 4 acquisition offers and 8 investment proposals. Our CFO estimates our valuation will likely double by quarter's end." The stunned silence that followed was deeply satisfying. For years, they had nodded politely through my updates, clearly believing I was engaged in some noble but ultimately inconsequential work. The stark reality of what I had built without their attention or approval was finally sinking in. 48 million, my mother repeated, her coffee forgotten. "Alex, why didn't you tell us things had progressed so far?" I took a deliberate sip of my latte before answering. I did, Mom. At Christmas, I mentioned securing Series B funding and our valuation, crossing the $30 million threshold. Dad asked about Emma's new telescope and the subject changed. My father shifted uncomfortably. Well, we're not tech people. These numbers don't mean much to us. They're dollar amounts, Dad, I replied evenly. Those usually get your attention. Emma coughed slightly, her way of signaling that a conversation was veering into uncomfortable territory. It was a family dynamic as old as our childhood. Emma the peacekeeper, me the difficult one who wouldn't let things go. The point is, I continued, softening my tone slightly, Verdant is established and growing. The award is validation, but it's not the beginning. It's just the first time my work has been visible enough for everyone to notice. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Tyler Reynolds, my chief competitor and former classmate who had once told me my ideas were cute, but impractical. I silenced it without answering. He had already left 3 messages since the ceremony, each one more congratulatory yet probing than the last. We've actually been approached about featuring you in the alumni magazine, my father said, changing tactics. They're doing a piece on Ridgeview graduates making an impact. I told them you'd be delighted. I set down my cup carefully. When was this? Oh, this morning. They called the house and forwarded the message to me. So the magazine that declined to include my undergraduate research award because it wasn't significant enough is now interested because I've been in the news? My mother's face fell. Alex, don't be difficult. They're trying to recognize your achievement. They're trying to claim credit for a success they did nothing to nurture, I corrected her. Just like... I stopped myself, but the unspoken accusation hung in the air. Just like you. Emma quickly stepped in. The recognition is well-deserved, regardless of their motivations. But it's your decision whether to participate. My father looked between us, clearly sensing he was missing something important. This is a networking opportunity, Alex. People read these publications. I almost laughed. Dad, I was just featured in Tech Innovations Monthly and the Seattle Times. My network is doing fine. The conversation shifted to safer topics after that, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time, I wasn't seeking their approval or understanding. I was simply stating facts about my life and work, and they were the ones struggling to catch up. As we finished brunch, my phone began buzzing continuously. My assistant trying to reach me about an urgent partnership opportunity. When I explained, I needed to head to the office, my parents exchanged a look I couldn't quite interpret. Of course, my mother said. Your work is important. 4 simple words, but they hit me with unexpected force. Your work is important. Not, that's exciting, or sounds interesting. A genuine acknowledgement of value. It shouldn't have mattered after all this time, but I felt a knot in my chest loosen slightly. At the office, my team had gathered in the conference room buzzing with excitement about the latest developments. Our lead engineer, Priya, had already mapped out scaling options based on the influx of interest. Our marketing director, Jason, had prepared a strategy for leveraging the award into broader market penetration. Also, Priya added with a grin, Reynolds Technologies called. Tyler wants to discuss a potential collaboration. I laughed, genuinely, amused by the sudden interest from a competitor who had previously dismissed our approach as fundamentally misguided. I'm sure he does, I replied. Let's put that on the back burner for now. As the meeting progressed, I found my mind occasionally drifting back to brunch. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's perception that I was somehow less than, the one who couldn't quite measure up. That weight had influenced decisions, colored interactions, created a baseline insecurity that required constant management. But sitting in that conference room surrounded by brilliant people who had chosen to follow my vision, I realized something important. I no longer needed my parents to understand my worth. Their validation, so long withheld and now so belatedly offered, had become irrelevant to who I was and what I had built. That night, alone in my apartment, I drafted a brief, polite email to the alumni magazine, declining their interview request. "While I appreciate the interest," I wrote, "my schedule is currently focused on expanding Verdant Systems implementation across additional markets. Perhaps we can revisit this opportunity when my work has produced even more significant results." As I clicked send, I felt a sense of lightness that had nothing to do with the award or the press attention. For the first time, I was fully stepping into my own narrative, not as Emma's sister, not as the Martinez family's other daughter, but simply as Alexandra Martinez, founder and CEO of Verdant Systems, creator of an algorithm that was changing the future of energy distribution. My parents would eventually adjust to this new reality, or they wouldn't. Either way, I would continue building, innovating, and leading, no longer seeking the approval that had been so long withheld. Part 4. The Extended Conflict. 3 weeks after the award ceremony, the narrative began to shift. What started as straightforward coverage of an innovative technology evolved into something more personal and not entirely accurate. "Sibling. Rivalry fuels energy revolution," one headline declared, followed by a speculative piece about how competition with my renowned physicist sister had driven me to success. The story fabricated a competitive dynamic between Emma and me, complete with quotes from family friends I didn't recognize. According to these sources, I had spent my life determined to outshine my brilliant sister, and my work in energy distribution was essentially an elaborate bid for attention. Emma called me the morning the article was published, her voice tight with anger. "Have you seen this garbage? They didn't even attempt to contact me." "Welcome to my world," I replied, scanning the piece for the third time. "They're creating a narrative that sells." Overlooked sister finally gets her due, makes for better reading than engineer develops efficient algorithm. "It's insulting to both of us," Emma continued. "They're trivializing your work and casting me as some antagonist in your story." I appreciated her indignation, though I couldn't help but note the irony. The funny thing is, if they'd interviewed our parents 5 years ago, they might have gotten quotes that supported this exact narrative. Silence followed, then a quiet, "That's not fair, Alex." "Isn't it?" I didn't want to argue, but years of accumulated hurt couldn't be erased by a few weeks of newfound respect. "You were always the standard I couldn't reach. That wasn't your fault, but it was our reality." Before Emma could respond, my assistant messaged to remind me about a meeting with potential investors. "I have to go," I told her. "Don't worry about the article. These things blow over." But it didn't blow over. Instead, it spawned a series of similarly angled stories. The Martinez Sisters, How Family Dynamics Drive Innovation, and Sibling Success Stories, the Martinez Edition. Each piece further distorted the reality of our relationship and my professional journey, reducing years of dedicated work to a psychological reaction to being overshadowed. The narrative began affecting business. Potential partners questioned whether my technology was truly revolutionary or just well-marketed based on a compelling personal story. One investor withdrew, citing concerns about the founder's motivations, as if solving energy distribution problems was somehow less valid if partly driven by personal experience. The final straw came when Tyler Reynolds gave an interview suggesting that my algorithm was essentially a modified version of work that had been circulating in academic circles, implying, without directly stating, that I had built on Emma's research without proper attribution. "This ends now," I told my PR director, Melissa, after reading Reynolds' comments. "We need to address this head-on." Melissa looked concerned. "Going defensive could backfire. These stories have momentum." "I'm not going defensive. I'm going factual." I arranged a joint interview with Emma for Tech Innovations Monthly, the publication that had covered my award initially. The reporter, Sophia Chen, had a reputation for substance over sensation, and I trusted her to represent our perspectives accurately. Emma flew in from Boston for the interview, arriving at my apartment the night before to prepare. We sat on my balcony overlooking the Seattle skyline, the space between us filled with years of unspoken tensions and misunderstandings. "I never saw myself as competing with you," Emma said suddenly, breaking a lengthy silence. "I was actually intimidated by you in many ways." I nearly spilled my wine. "Intimidated? By me? You were the prodigy." Emma shook her head. "I was good at tests and structured learning. You could look at a broken appliance and not only fix it but improve it. You connected with people easily while I fumbled through social interactions. You saw the world differently, and I envied that." The admission stunned me. For all our lives, I had assumed Emma saw herself as I believed our parents saw her, the superior Martinez. The idea that she had envied aspects of my abilities had never occurred to me. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked. "The same reason you didn't, probably. The roles were established early. I was the academic one. You were the creative one. Stepping outside those boundaries felt dangerous." We talked late into the night, reconstructing memories from both perspectives, uncovering misunderstandings that had shaped our relationship. By morning, we had a clearer understanding not only of our past, but of how to address the present situation. The interview with Sophia took place in Verdon's conference room. Emma and I sat side by side, presenting a united front against the distorted narrative that had been building. "Let's start with the elephant in the room," Sophia began. "These stories about sibling rivalry driving innovation, what's your response?" I met her gaze steadily. "They're reductive and inaccurate. My work in energy distribution algorithms developed from my undergraduate research and years of industry observation. It wasn't a reaction to my sister's success. It was a response to an inefficient system that needed improvement." Emma nodded. "The media loves simplified narratives. The overlooked sibling finally getting recognition makes for easy headlines. But it diminishes Alex's genuine technical innovation and implies I somehow stood in her way, which couldn't be further from the truth." Sophia looked between us. "But surely growing up with a sister who received significant recognition for her intelligence influenced your path." "Of course it did," I acknowledged. "Our experiences shape us. But there's a difference between being influenced by family dynamics and being defined by them. The algorithm that won the Innovation Award wasn't created to prove something to my family. It was created to solve a real-world problem affecting millions of people's access to efficient energy." The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, covering the technical aspects of my work, Emma's research in theoretical physics, and the limited overlap between our fields. We addressed Reynolds' insinuations directly, with Emma explaining in expert terms why my approach was fundamentally different from existing academic frameworks, including her own. "What Alex has created," Emma stated firmly, "is not an extension or modification of existing models. It's a paradigm shift in how we conceptualize energy distribution. If anything, my research might benefit from incorporating some of her insights, not the other way around." As the interview concluded, Sophia asked one final question. "Looking ahead, do you see opportunities for collaboration between your fields?" Emma and I exchanged glances. "We've actually discussed that possibility," I revealed. "There are interesting intersections between Emma's work in quantum field theory and some of the distribution models we're developing for the next generation of our algorithm." "The Martinez sisters' collaboration," Sophia mused. "That would be quite a story." "A much better one than sibling rivalry," Emma replied with a smile. The article was published 3 days later under the headline, "Beyond Narratives, The Real Innovation Behind Verdant Systems." It methodically dismantled the oversimplified sibling rivalry story, replaced sensationalism with technical substance, and established both Emma and me as respected experts in our distinct fields. Reynolds's insinuations were addressed directly and debunked with technical specificity. The piece even included commentary from Professor Wilson, who detailed the originality of my approach dating back to my undergraduate work, long before Verdant Systems existed. The response was immediate and largely positive. Industry publications picked up the more accurate narrative. Technical forums engaged with the actual innovation rather than the family story, and several of the hesitant partners reached out to resume discussions. My parents called after reading the article, their reaction more subdued than I expected. It was very, informative, my mother offered, clearly processing the technical aspects that had been beyond her understanding. I didn't realize the scope of what you'd created, my father admitted. The way Emma explained it, it sounds revolutionary. There it was again, the need for Emma's validation to accept my achievement. But this time, instead of frustration, I felt something closer to compassion. They were trying, in their limited way, to understand a world that had evolved beyond their framework. It is revolutionary, I confirmed, and it's just the beginning. After we hung up, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically things had changed in just a few weeks. The award had thrust me into public awareness, but it was the conflict that followed, and our response to it, that had truly reshaped perceptions, both external and internal. Emma texted later that evening. Looks like we made a pretty good, team. I smiled at my phone. Always did, I replied. Just took us a while to figure it out. Part 5. The Transformation and Insight. 6 months after the award ceremony, I stood on another stage, this time at MIT, where Emma had arranged for me to deliver a guest lecture on practical applications of adaptive systems. The audience was filled with engineering and physics students, many of whom had followed the coverage of my work and the subsequent sibling narrative saga. As I concluded my presentation, a young woman raised her hand. You've talked about the technical challenges you overcame, but I'm curious about the personal ones. What advice would you give to someone who feels overshadowed or misunderstood in their family? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. A year ago, I might have deflected, sticking strictly to technical matters. Instead, I set down my presentation remote and considered my response carefully. I spent many years measuring my worth through other people's perceptions, I finally said, particularly my family's. That created a distortion in how I viewed myself and my work. The most important shift for me wasn't technological. It was realizing that validation had to come from within first. External recognition followed only after I fully committed to my own path. I scanned the audience, noting several students nodding. If you feel overshadowed, remember that comparisons are usually based on narrow metrics that miss the full spectrum of human capability. My sister and I excel in different areas, take different approaches to problems, and ultimately make different contributions to the world. Neither is inherently more valuable than the other. Later, at dinner with Emma and several faculty members, one of her colleagues raised a toast. To the Martinez sisters, proving that brilliance runs in the family, just in different channels. Emma squeezed my hand under the table, a private acknowledgement of how far we'd come from the simplified roles we'd been assigned in childhood. After dinner, we walked across the campus where she had spent her formative academic years, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. You know what's ironic? Emma said, breaking a comfortable silence. I always envied how you could command a room, make complex ideas accessible. I spent years trying to develop those skills, and they still don't come naturally to me. I laughed. And I spent years trying to be more methodical, more precise in my thinking, like you. Maybe that's the real story, Emma mused. Not rivalry, but unconscious influence. We were learning from each other all along. Back in Seattle, Verdant Systems continued its expansion. The algorithm that had won the award was now being implemented in energy grids across 3 countries, with documented efficiency improvements exceeding our initial projections. Our staff had grown to 62, and we had moved to larger offices overlooking Elliott Bay. My relationship with my parents had evolved into something I hadn't expected. Not the wholehearted approval I had once craved, but a mutual respect, based on clearer understanding. They had visited the Verdant offices during a trip to Seattle, watching with genuine interest as I demonstrated how our system worked. My father had asked thoughtful questions about scaling challenges, while my mother had surprised me by connecting with our head of human resources about company culture initiatives. They still sometimes slipped into old patterns, occasional comments revealing their lingering perception of Emma as the natural genius and me as the determined striver. But these moments no longer stung as they once had. I had stopped needing them to fully understand or validate my path. The media narrative had largely moved on from the sibling angle, focusing instead on the measurable impact of Verdant's technology. Industry publications regularly featured our case studies, and I had been invited to consult on national energy policy frameworks. Tyler Reynolds had eventually proposed a limited partnership focused on implementation strategies, an offer I had accepted after careful consideration and thorough contract review. On the anniversary of the award ceremony, I received an unexpected package from Emma. Inside was a framed newspaper clipping, the first major article about my innovation, alongside a handwritten note. "Remember when we built that makeshift weather station in the backyard? You insisted on redesigning the rain gauge because the standard design was inefficient. I thought you were being difficult, but your version collected 30% more data. You've always seen problems differently than the rest of us. I'm proud to be your sister, not the smart one, just the one lucky enough to watch you change the world. Love, Emma." I placed the framed article on my office wall, next to the Innovation Award. Together, they represented not just professional achievement but a personal journey, from seeking external validation to finding internal confidence, from accepting assigned limitations to defining my own capabilities. That evening, I received a call from a high school student in Ridgeview working on a profile of hometown success stories for a school project. "Everyone knows about your sister," she said, "but I wanted to focus on your journey instead. You faced learning challenges similar to mine, yet you've achieved so much." As I spoke with her, sharing insights about leveraging different thinking styles and finding strength in perceived limitations, I realized how profoundly things had changed. The narrative had shifted, not just in the press, but in my hometown, in my family, and most importantly, within myself. When the student asked what I considered my greatest achievement, I paused. The obvious answer was the algorithm, the company, the measurable impact on energy efficiency. But the truth was more complex. Learning to value my own perspective, I finally answered. Understanding that different doesn't mean deficient. That was the foundation that made everything else possible. I often think about that high school student from Ridgeview who interviewed me. Maya was her name, bright, curious, and struggling with many of the same labels that had been placed on me years ago. 6 months after our conversation, she emailed to tell me she'd won a regional science competition with a project on alternative energy collection methods. Her message included a photograph of her with the award, standing proudly next to a display that cited Verdant Systems' approach as an inspiration. Sometimes the ripples of our work reach places we never anticipated. The transformation in my professional life continued its upward trajectory. Verdant's technology had now been implemented in 12 countries, with documented efficiency improvements consistently above 35%. Our Seattle headquarters had expanded to occupy 3 floors, and we'd opened satellite offices in Boston, Frankfurt, and Singapore. The company valued at $48 million when I'd had brunch with my parents after the award ceremony was now approaching $1 billion valuation. What remained more complex was the personal evolution, the subtle shift in dynamics, with my family, my sister, and most importantly, with myself. Emma and I had developed a new rhythm to our relationship. Monthly video calls focused not just on catching up, but on exploring collaborative ideas. Her theoretical work in quantum field theory had unexpected applications in predicting energy consumption patterns, while my practical experience with distribution networks offered her research team valuable real-world datasets. We had co-authored a paper for the Journal of Applied Physics, merging our distinct approaches into something neither of us could have created alone. The Martinez method, one reviewer had called our collaborative framework. Emma had texted me immediately, "We're a method now? Should we get matching lab coats?" My parents had adjusted to the new reality with varying degrees of success. My mother had become an enthusiastic chronicler of my press mentions, maintaining a scrapbook that she proudly showed to friends and neighbors. My father had transitioned from dismissive to overly involved, regularly sending me articles on energy market trends with subject lines like, "Thought this might help your business." His suggestions were rarely applicable, but the effort behind them represented a seismic shift. During their visit to Seattle last spring, I had overheard him speaking to a neighbor on the phone. "Alexandra's algorithm is revolutionizing energy distribution across Europe now." Yes, that Alexandra. My daughter. The pride in his voice was unmistakable, though tinged with a hint of disbelief, as if he were still adjusting to this version of reality. What neither of them fully grasped was that their validation, once so desperately sought, had become almost incidental to my sense of self. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been built in layers, each achievement and recognition solidifying my confidence not just in my work, but in my worth. Independent of their assessment. The real watershed moment came unexpectedly, during a national conference on renewable energy in Chicago. I had just finished delivering the keynote address when a distinguished-looking woman approached me, hand extended. Dr. Elaine Winters. She introduced herself. "I've been following your work since your first municipal implementation. Remarkable approach, especially your adaptive response algorithms." I recognized her name immediately. Dr. Winters was a pioneer in the field, someone whose research papers I had studied religiously during my university years. "Your paper on distribution inefficiencies in renewable systems was one of my foundational influences," I told her, trying to maintain professional composure while internally starstruck. She smiled warmly. "And now your implementations are providing data that's reshaping some of my theoretical frameworks. Isn't that how progress should work?" As we continued our conversation, moving to a quieter corner of the reception area, she mentioned something that shifted my perspective permanently. "You know," she said, sipping her sparkling water, "I've been in this field for 40 years, and the most valuable innovators have always been those who approach problems from unexpected angles. Most of them, like you, weren't considered the traditional types in academic settings." "What do you mean by traditional?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "The linear thinkers," she clarified. "The ones who excel at standardized learning but often struggle with paradigm shifts. We need them, of course. They're excellent at refining existing systems. But it's the divergent thinkers, the ones who see connections others miss, who truly transform industries." She set down her glass. "I was diagnosed with dyslexia in an era when it was barely recognized. My professors told me I wasn't suited for scientific pursuits." I stared at her, this legend in our field, suddenly seeing my own journey reflected in hers. "How did you move past that?" "By realizing their assessment was based on a narrow definition of intelligence," she replied simply. "And by finding mentors who recognized that different cognitive approaches yield different insights, neither inherently superior, just different. And in innovation, different is valuable." That conversation lingered with me long after the conference ended. Dr. Winters had articulated something I had felt intuitively but had never fully conceptualized. My perceived weaknesses had actually been unrecognized strengths, waiting for the right application. When I returned to Seattle, I initiated a new program at Verdant, an internship specifically targeting students with learning differences. The selection process emphasized creative problem-solving and pattern recognition rather than traditional academic metrics. The first cohort included 5 brilliant young people whose thinking had been undervalued in conventional educational settings. Among them was Maya, the Ridgeview student who had interviewed me for her school project. Now a freshman at Washington State University, she had applied with a proposal for improving user interfaces in energy monitoring systems, making complex data more accessible through visual pattern recognition, an approach that reflected her own visual learning style. "I never thought my brain being different could be an advantage," she told me during her orientation, "until I read about you." The internship program garnered attention not just within the industry, but in educational circles. I was invited to speak at conferences focused on neurodiversity in STEM fields, sharing how Verdant had benefited from embracing different cognitive approaches. At one such conference in San Francisco, a reporter asked if my family had always recognized my potential, despite my learning challenges. The question was clearly fishing for the overcoming family doubt narrative that had circulated early in my public recognition. My journey wasn't about proving my family wrong, I responded carefully. It was about discovering that success doesn't have to follow a predetermined path. Different cognitive styles lead to different insights, and innovation often emerges from unexpected places. It was a diplomatic answer that revealed little about the complex reality of family dynamics. The full truth was more nuanced. My parents had shown love, but limited understanding. Emma had been both an unwitting competitor and eventually a critical ally, and I had gradually learned that validation had to come from within before it could come from without. The reporter persisted. "But surely being compared to your academically gifted sister must have been challenging?" I paused, considering my words carefully. Having a brilliant sister taught me an important lesson early on. There's more than one way to be exceptional. Emma excels in theoretical frameworks. I excel in practical applications. For years, I misinterpreted that as a hierarchy of value. Now I understand it's simply a diversity of approach, and that diversity is precisely what advances human knowledge. Afterward, Emma texted me, "Just saw your interview. Diversity of approach." I'm stealing that phrase for my next departmental meeting. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have imagined during our childhood. A genuine partnership of equals, each recognizing and valuing the other's unique strengths. The real test of this new dynamic came when our grandmother passed away unexpectedly. The Martinez family gathered in Ridgeview for the funeral, the first time all of us had been together in the family home since my public recognition had begun. The house felt smaller than I remembered, the familiar living room now laden with memories both comforting and painful. Photos lined the mantelpiece, Emma in her graduation robes, me in various stages of childhood, always slightly off to the side or looking away from the camera. As relatives and family friends filled the house after the service, I retreated to the kitchen for a moment of quiet. My Aunt Gloria found me there, stirring cream into my coffee with perhaps more focus than the task required. "Your grandmother was so proud of you," she said, reaching for a mug from the cabinet. "She kept every article, you know. Had a special folder labeled Alexandra's Innovations." The revelation surprised me. Grandma Martinez had always been warm but distant about my work, asking polite questions at family gatherings but rarely engaging deeply with my answers. "I didn't know she followed my career," I admitted. Aunt Gloria's expression softened. "Oh," she followed it closely. "Called me after every news mention, every award. 'Did you see what my Alexandra has done now?' she'd say. She never really mentioned it to me. Your grandmother came from a generation that rarely expressed pride directly, Aunt Gloria explained, especially to the person themselves, but she told everyone else. She hesitated, then added, "She always believed you'd find your path, even when others weren't sure." That evening, as the family gathered in the living room sharing memories of Grandma Martinez, I noticed something I hadn't before: the subtle shifts in how relatives engaged with me. Cousins who had once directed all their questions about careers and achievements to Emma now included me equally in their conversations. Uncles who had patted my head with vague encouragement at family gatherings now asked specific questions about Verdant's technology. Most revealing was my father's behavior. When Uncle Roger inquired about the family business, assuming he meant my father's insurance agency, Dad redirected. "Alexandra's company is leading energy innovation across 3 continents. The insurance business is doing fine, but nothing compared to what she's building." Later, helping my mother sort through some of Grandma's belongings, I discovered the folder Aunt Gloria had mentioned. Inside were not just recent articles, but clippings dating back to my high school science fair projects, certificates from competitions I'd forgotten I'd entered, and a copy of my first published research paper from university with notes in Grandma's spidery handwriting in the margins. "She always kept track," my mother said quietly, watching me flip through the collection. "I should have done the same." The simple statement contained layers of acknowledgement, of attention not given, potential not recognized, accomplishments not celebrated. Rather than feeling vindicated, I felt a complex sadness for all the years of connection we had missed. "It's never too late to start," I offered. That night, Emma and I sat on the back porch swing, just as we had countless times during our childhood. The familiar creak of its chains provided a rhythmic backdrop to our conversation. "Do you remember when you rewired the garage door opener?" Emma asked suddenly. "Dad was furious because you took it apart without permission, but then it worked. Better than before." I laughed at the memory. "He said I was too curious for my own good." "I was so jealous," Emma admitted. "Not of the scolding, but of how you just saw how things could work differently. I could memorize formulas and concepts, but you could look at a problem and see solutions nobody else considered." "I was jealous of how easily everything came to you," I confessed. "How you never had to fight to be taken seriously." Emma was quiet for a moment. "It wasn't as easy as it looked. Being the smart one came with its own pressure. Every A felt like failure. Every subject I didn't immediately master seemed like evidence that I wasn't actually special, just a temporary prodigy who would eventually be revealed as ordinary." We sat in silence, absorbing these revelations. How completely we had misunderstood each other's experiences. How the roles assigned to us had constrained us both in different ways. We were both trying to navigate a narrow definition of success, I reflected, one that didn't fully accommodate either of us. Back in Seattle, I found myself contemplating these insights as Verdant prepared for its biggest expansion yet, a comprehensive implementation across Australia's energy grid that would be our largest project to date. The team had grown to over 100 employees, many of whom had been attracted to the company specifically because of our reputation for innovative thinking and diverse approaches. During a planning meeting, our operations director presented a conventional timeline for the Australian rollout, methodical, structured, and proven based on our previous implementations. "It's solid," I acknowledged, "but I wonder if we're missing an opportunity here." The room quieted, team members exchanging glances. They had learned that this particular phrase often preceded what we had come to call Martinez pivots. Unexpected shifts in approach that initially seemed counterintuitive but ultimately yielded superior results. "The Australian grid has unique characteristics," I continued. "What if, instead of our standard sequential implementation, we used a decentralized approach? We could identify 5 key nodes and implement simultaneously, allowing each to adapt independently before connecting the systems. Our technical lead looked skeptical. That's significantly more complex logistically. We'd need 5 implementation teams running concurrently. And 5 times the real-time data collection during the initial phase, added our data scientist, already calculating the implications. Actually, that could give us insight into regional variations we might miss with a sequential rollout. The discussion that followed was energetic, with team members building on the concept, identifying potential challenges, and proposing solutions. What emerged was a hybrid approach that maintained the structural integrity of our proven implementation model, while incorporating the advantages of simultaneous deployment. As the meeting concluded, our operations director shook her head with a mixture of exasperation and admiration. This is going to require completely reworking our logistics, but it's brilliant. I smiled. Different isn't always more difficult. Sometimes it's just different. Walking back to my office, I reflected on how far I had come from the girl who had been labeled as learning disabled in Ridgeview Elementary. That girl who had been told repeatedly that her thinking was too scattered, her approaches too unconventional, her questions disruptive to the lesson plan. On my desk sat an invitation to deliver a commencement address at my former university's engineering school, the same program where I had once had to fight for professors to take my ideas seriously. The irony wasn't lost on me. Next to it was a more personal invitation. Emma had accepted a prestigious position at CERN and wanted me to attend her welcome reception. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Saw Verdant mentioned in the Wall Street Journal again. Sending you the link in case you missed it. It was the 3rd such message this week, his way of showing interest, of participating in this part of my life that he had once dismissed. Later that afternoon, I met with Maya and the other interns for their project presentations. Each had approached their assigned challenges with perspectives shaped by their unique cognitive styles. Maya's visual mapping of energy consumption patterns had revealed inefficiencies our conventional analytics had missed. Another intern, whose ADHD had made traditional education challenging, had developed a hyper-responsive alert system that could identify grid anomalies within milliseconds. What all of you have demonstrated, I told them afterward, is precisely why Verdant values cognitive diversity. You've each found solutions that wouldn't have emerged from standardized approaches. Maya stayed behind after the others had left, her expression thoughtful. My parents called yesterday after I told them about my project being implemented in the Singapore office trial. That's wonderful, I said, recognizing the mixture of pride and hesitation in her voice. How did they react? My dad said he never thought my daydreaming problem would turn out to be useful. She gave a small laugh. I think that's progress. Actually, a year ago, he wouldn't have connected the two at all. I nodded, understanding the complex emotions behind her words. People's understanding evolves gradually. Sometimes their frameworks don't expand until reality forces them to. Like your parents? She asked, then immediately backpedaled. Sorry, that's too personal. It's a fair question, I assured her. And yes, my family's perception shifted when external validation made my success impossible to misinterpret. But the more important shift happened internally. I stopped measuring my worth through their recognition. Maya considered this. That's the hardest part, she admitted. I still catch myself wanting them to finally get it, to see that I'm not broken or less capable, just different. That desire never fully disappears, I acknowledged. We're hardwired to seek validation from our families. The freedom comes not from eliminating that desire, but from no longer being defined by it. After Maya left, I found myself dwelling on our conversation. How many others were out there like us? Bright minds with unconventional approaches, their potential constrained by narrow definitions of intelligence and ability. The thought prompted a decision I had been contemplating for months. The next morning, I called a meeting with Verdant's executive team to propose establishing a foundation focused on supporting neurodivergent students in STEM fields. The Martinez Innovation Fellowship would provide not just financial support, but mentorship, adaptive learning resources, and real-world project opportunities. This isn't just philanthropy, I explained as we discussed the details. It's also strategic talent development. Some of our most innovative team members have been those who think differently. We're creating a pipeline that benefits these students while strengthening our industry. The proposal was approved unanimously, with several board members offering additional personal contributions to the foundation's initial funding. The announcement generated significant positive press, with education advocates highlighting the initiative as a model for how companies could expand opportunity while advancing innovation. What I didn't share publicly was how deeply personal this project felt, how it represented a full-circle moment in my journey. The girl who had been marginalized for thinking differently was now creating pathways for others like her. The woman whose value had been questioned was now demonstrating that different cognitive approaches weren't just valid, but valuable. During the Foundation's launch event, Emma surprised me by flying in from Geneva. She stood at the back of the room during my presentation, her presence a silent affirmation of how far we had both come from the prescribed roles of our childhood. Afterward, as we shared a late dinner at my favorite Seattle restaurant, she raised her glass. To redefining what it means to be the smart one, she said with a smile. I clinked my glass against hers. To finding our own paths to exceptional. Later that week, an email arrived from my high school physics teacher, Mr. Delaney, the rare educator who had recognized my potential despite my struggling with his traditional teaching methods. He had read about the fellowship program and written to share his pride in what I had accomplished. I always knew you saw patterns others missed, he wrote. Your questions in class often led me to reconsider explanations I had been using for decades. I'm sorry our educational system wasn't better equipped to nurture your type of brilliance, but I'm grateful you persevered anyway. What you're building now, both technologically and in creating opportunities for other unconventional thinkers, matters profoundly. His message reminded me of a pivotal moment in his classroom when I had questioned a standard approach to calculating energy transfer rates. Rather than dismissing my alternative method, he had worked through it with me after class, eventually acknowledging that while unconventional, it was mathematically sound and actually more efficient in certain contexts. You're taking the scenic route, he had told me, but sometimes that route reveals vistas the highway misses entirely. That conversation had been a rare moment of validation in an educational experience otherwise filled with frustration and misunderstanding. Now, 15 years later, his words seemed prophetic. I printed his email and pinned it to my office bulletin board alongside other meaningful mementos: the cover of Tech Innovations Monthly, featuring Verdant's technology, a photograph from the fellowship launch, and a handwritten note from Maya, thanking me for showing that different isn't deficient. Together, these items represented not just professional accomplishments, but a deeper personal evolution. The transformation from seeking external validation to recognizing my inherent worth, from trying to fit predetermined molds to creating new paradigms. The journey wasn't complete, of course. There were still moments when old doubts surfaced, when the echoes of early labels and limitations tried to reassert themselves. But these instances grew rarer and less powerful as my sense of self-worth became more firmly rooted in my own assessment, rather than others' perceptions. My mother called one evening as I was preparing for a major presentation to potential international partners. After discussing her garden plans and my father's recent retirement party, she hesitated, then said, "Something that caught me off guard. I've been thinking about those parent-teacher conferences when you were in elementary school," she began cautiously. "How they always focused on what you couldn't do rather than what you could. I should have challenged that narrative more. I should have been a better advocate." The admission hit me with unexpected force, not because I had been actively seeking this acknowledgement, but because it represented a level of reflection I hadn't expected from her. "You did your best? With the information you had," I offered, surprised by how genuinely I meant it. The anger and resentment that had once accompanied these memories had largely dissolved, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of how limited the frameworks had been, for all of us. "Still," she persisted, "I want you to know I see it now. How extraordinary your mind is, how it always was." After we hung up, I sat in my home office, looking out at the Seattle skyline illuminated against the night sky. The city lights blurred slightly as unexpected tears welled in my eyes, not from lingering hurt, but from the recognition of how complete the circle had become. The headline that had once seemed so significant, "Parents always said, 'Your sister's the smart one,' until my name appeared in the news," now felt like an oversimplification of a much more complex journey. The true story wasn't about finally proving my worth to my family or outshining my sister. It was about discovering a definition of intelligence and success expansive enough to include different types of minds, different approaches to problem solving, different paths to contribution. As I returned to preparing my presentation for the next day, I felt a sense of peace that had been long in coming. My journey had never really been about changing others' perceptions, though that had happened. 2. It had been about changing my own understanding of my worth, my potential, and my place in the world. And that was the most revolutionary algorithm I had ever developed. The Martinez Innovation Fellowship was now entering its second year, with 23 scholars pursuing projects across various STEM disciplines. Watching them collaborate in Verdant's Innovation Lab brought a particular kind of satisfaction, the kind that comes from creating opportunities you wish had existed for your younger self. Gabriela Suarez, one of our earliest fellows, had recently been offered a position at NASA's Renewable Energy Division based on her work optimizing solar collection patterns. Daniel Kim had developed a mathematical model for predicting energy consumption that was being integrated into Verdant's next-generation algorithm. These bright minds, once overlooked because their thinking didn't conform to traditional educational models, were now pioneers at the forefront of technological advancement. I was reviewing applications for the next cohort when my assistant knocked softly on my office door. "Senator Wilkins is online too," she informed me. "Her office says it's regarding the National Energy Infrastructure Initiative." The call wasn't entirely unexpected. Washington had been buzzing about a comprehensive energy overhaul, and Verdant's success in implementing adaptive distribution systems made us natural consultants for such an undertaking. Still, a direct call from the senator herself suggested something more significant than routine consultation. "Alexandra," the senator greeted me warmly, "I hope I'm not interrupting your afternoon." "Not at all, Senator. How can I help you?" "I'll get straight to the point. The President is forming a special commission to transform our national energy infrastructure over the next decade. We need someone to chair the Technological Innovation Committee, someone with proven expertise in adaptive systems and a track record of implementing large-scale solutions." I felt a momentary vertigo, the kind that comes with standing at an unexpected threshold. "That's a significant undertaking." "It is," she agreed. "But your work at Verdant has demonstrated exactly the kind of revolutionary thinking we need. The committee would have substantial resources and authority to shape how energy is distributed across the country for generations to come." After discussing more details, I promised to consider the offer and respond within the week. As I hung up, the magnitude of the opportunity settled over me. This wasn't just professional recognition. It was a chance to scale Verdant's innovative approach to a national level, potentially transforming energy accessibility across the entire country. My first instinct was to call Emma. Despite our busy schedules, we had maintained our monthly video calls, which had evolved into a blend of personal catching up and professional collaboration. Her face appeared on my screen, backdropped by the sleek laboratories of CERN. "Perfect timing," she greeted me. I just finished a meeting. I shared the senator's proposal, watching Emma's expression shift from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "That's extraordinary, Alex," she said finally. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. Your approach to distribution has always had this potential." "It would mean restructuring Verdant's leadership," I mused, "possibly relocating to D.C., at least part-time." Emma nodded. "Big changes, but also big impact." She leaned closer to the camera. "Remember when we used to argue about which was more important? Theoretical advancement or practical application?" I laughed. "You always said understanding. The underlying principles was paramount. I always argued that implementation was where real change happened. And now you have a chance to prove your point on the national stage." Her smile was genuine, without a trace of the competitiveness that had once colored our interactions. "Though I'll still argue that my quantum field theories laid groundwork you're benefiting from." "Fair enough," I conceded. "Maybe we were both right all along." After we hung up, I walked to the large windows of my office, gazing out at Seattle's skyline. The city had been good to me, had provided the distance I needed from Ridgeview's limitations, had offered the space to build something revolutionary. The thought of dividing my time between here and Washington, D.C. brought mixed emotions. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Your mother mentioned Senator Wilkins called. Anything important?" The message highlighted how dramatically things had changed. 5 years ago, my parents would have assumed any political contact was related to Emma's research funding. Now, they immediately connected such calls to my work. I typed back, "Possible appointment to chair a national energy committee. Still considering." His response came quickly. "National committee? That's my girl." Those 3 words, "That's my girl," landed differently than I expected. There was a time when such validation from him would have meant everything. Now, it was pleasant but incidental, like a favorable weather forecast on a day already planned. The next morning, I convened a meeting with Verdant's executive team to discuss the senator's offer. Their responses were unanimously supportive, though tinged with practical concerns about leadership transition and time management. "We've built something remarkable here," I acknowledged, "and I wouldn't consider anything that might compromise that. But this could amplify our impact exponentially." "It's the logical next step," our CTO Rajiv observed. "We've proven the model works at the municipal and regional levels. National implementation is the natural progression. Plus," added our Chief Strategy Officer Lydia, "having our approach embedded in national infrastructure would position Verdant as the definitive leader in adaptive energy systems globally." As we hashed out the logistics, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led to this juncture. From a struggling student labeled as learning disabled to potentially shaping national energy policy, the trajectory seemed both improbable and, in retrospect, somehow inevitable. Later that day, I received an unexpected call from my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patel. She had retired years ago, but had apparently kept tabs on former students. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out," she began. "I read about your fellowship program in an education journal and wanted to tell you how much it means to see a former student creating such opportunities." Her voice brought me back to her cramped office with its motivational posters and college brochures, a space where I had once sat while she gently suggested I set realistic expectations about my academic future. "It's good to hear from you, Mrs. Patel," I said, genuinely, meaning it. "The fellowship program is one of my proudest achievements." "I've been following your career for some time," she admitted. "Your success has made me reconsider many of the assumptions I held during my years as a counselor." There was a humility in her voice that disarmed any lingering resentment I might have harbored. "Educational models were different then," I offered. "We all worked within the frameworks available to us." "Still," she persisted, "I wonder how many others like you I might have underestimated." Our conversation continued, bridging decades and shifting perspectives. Before we hung up, she asked a question that lingered with me long afterward. If you could go back and tell your teenage self something, knowing what you know now, what would it be? I considered this carefully. I would tell her that the way her mind works isn't wrong, it's just tuned to a different frequency, and that someday, that frequency will pick up signals others miss entirely. That evening, I drafted my formal acceptance to Senator Wilkins, outlining a strategic framework for balancing my responsibilities at Verdant with the National Committee work. As I wrote, I realized this appointment represented more than personal or professional advancement. It was an opportunity to embed alternative thinking approaches into systems that would impact millions. The official announcement came 3 weeks later, accompanied by a flurry of press coverage that positioned me as a pioneer in energy innovation. The narrative had evolved significantly from the earlier sibling rivalry angle, now focusing on how neurodivergent thinking had contributed to revolutionary approaches in energy distribution. My mother called immediately after the White House press release, her voice vibrating with a complex mixture of pride and lingering disbelief. "The president mentioned you by name," she kept repeating, as if this external validation was the final, irrefutable proof of my capabilities. "It's an exciting opportunity," I acknowledged, choosing to focus on the future rather than dwelling on how long it had taken for my work to be recognized within my own family. "Your father is telling everyone at his golf club," she continued. "He's even carrying a printout of the press release." I could picture it clearly. My father, who had once dismissed my ideas as impractical, now proudly sharing my accomplishments with anyone who would listen. The image brought a smile tinged with the bittersweet recognition of how external validation had transformed his perception. The following month was a whirlwind of transitions. Verdant's leadership structure was reorganized to accommodate my divided responsibilities. I leased an apartment in Georgetown for my weeks in D.C., while maintaining my Seattle home as my primary residence. The committee work began with intensive briefings on current infrastructure, projected needs, and political considerations. Throughout this period, I maintained regular check-ins with the Martinez Fellowship scholars, unwilling to let my new responsibilities diminish my commitment to nurturing the next generation of unconventional thinkers. During one such session, Maya, now a full-time junior engineer at Verdant, asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you ever worry that mainstream recognition might dilute the revolutionary nature of your approach? That once your ideas become the establishment, they might lose their transformative edge?" Her question was insightful, highlighting the tension between impact and innovation, between changing the system and becoming part of it. It was exactly the kind of unexpected perspective that made the fellowship program so valuable. "It's a legitimate concern," I acknowledged. "Systems naturally resist dramatic change. They tend to absorb new ideas by modifying them to fit existing frameworks." "So how do you prevent that?" she pressed. I considered the question carefully. "By embedding principles rather than just procedures, by building adaptability into the foundation of the system itself, and by ensuring diverse thinking remains central to ongoing development." I smiled at the group of fellows, each brilliant in their own unconventional way. That's why programs like this one aren't just nice additions. They're essential safeguards against stagnation. As the meeting concluded, I found myself reflecting on Maya's question in the context of my own journey. There was a time when I had desperately sought mainstream acceptance, when validation from traditional authorities had seemed the ultimate goal. Now I recognized that the true value of my perspective lay precisely in its difference, in its ability to challenge established thinking and reveal alternative possibilities. This insight informed my approach to the National Committee work. Rather than simply advocating for the implementation of Verdant's existing systems, I focused on establishing principles that would allow for continued innovation and adaptation. My first major proposal centered on creating decentralized experimental zones where emerging technologies could be tested without the constraints of national standardization. Energy needs aren't uniform across regions, I explained during a presentation to the full commission. Different communities have different consumption patterns, different available resources, and different priorities. Our national infrastructure should reflect and respond to that diversity rather than imposing uniformity. Senator Wilkins nodded approvingly. Adaptive rather than prescriptive. Exactly. We're not just upgrading hardware. We're reimagining the entire relationship between energy production, distribution, and consumption. As the committee's work progressed, I found myself spending more time in Washington than I had initially anticipated. The political dimensions of infrastructure planning required constant navigation, with competing interests and entrenched perspectives creating resistance to truly innovative approaches. During one particularly frustrating session, where regional representatives seemed more concerned with securing resources for their districts than optimizing the overall system, I received an unexpected text from Emma. Bureaucracy wearing you down yet? Remember, I warned you that implementation is where good theories go to die. Her gentle teasing made me laugh despite my frustration. Theory is easy when you don't have to deal with senators protecting coal interests, I texted back. Want me to explain quantum field theory to them? She offered. It might distract them long enough for you to slip your proposals through. Our banter reminded me of a crucial truth. Revolutionary ideas rarely follow smooth implementation paths. The resistance I was encountering wasn't personal. It was the natural immune response of any established system confronted with transformation. Armed with this perspective, I adjusted my strategy. Rather than pushing for comprehensive adoption immediately, I developed a phased approach that allowed for regional customization while maintaining core adaptive principles. I built relationships with key stakeholders, taking time to understand their concerns and demonstrate how flexible implementation could address their specific needs. Gradually, the resistance began to soften. When the first phase of the infrastructure proposal passed through committee review with majority support, Senator Wilkins pulled me aside. You've accomplished something remarkable here, she said quietly. When we first formed this committee, the betting pools in Washington gave your approach less than a 20% chance of making it through the initial review. What changed their minds? I asked. She smiled. You did. Not by compromising your vision, but by showing how it could accommodate diverse needs while still maintaining its revolutionary core. As we moved into the implementation planning phase, I found myself traveling extensively, meeting with regional energy authorities, visiting potential pilot sites, and presenting the framework to state legislators. During a stop in Boston, I arranged dinner with Emma, our first in-person meeting in nearly 6 months. She selected a small Italian restaurant near her Cambridge apartment, away from the formal academic settings where she usually operated. As I entered, I spotted her immediately, her familiar profile outlined against the restaurant's warm lighting. Despite our regular video calls, seeing her in person highlighted subtle changes, a new confidence in her posture, slight traces of gray at her temples that she hadn't bothered to conceal. The National Energy Czar arrives, she teased as I joined her. Should I curtsy? Only if I should bow to the quantum pioneer, I returned easily. We fell into conversation with the comfortable rhythm of two people who had moved beyond competition into genuine appreciation of each other's distinct paths. She updated me on her research team's latest breakthrough. I shared the challenges of navigating energy policy through political crosscurrents. Mom called yesterday, Emma mentioned as we finished our main course. She wanted my help planning a surprise for your birthday. Let me guess. She's creating a scrapbook of my press clippings, I said dryly. Emma laughed. Close. She's organizing a family celebration at the house. She seemed genuinely excited about it. Her expression grew more thoughtful. They've come a long way, you know. Dad actually corrected Uncle Roger last week when he referred to me as the genius of the family. Told him the Martinez family has different kinds of brilliance. The anecdote touched me unexpectedly. That's progress. It is, Emma agreed, though I realize it comes after external validation made your success impossible to ignore. Better late than never, I suppose. Is it enough? She asked suddenly, her gaze direct. Their recognition now, after all this time? The question cut to the heart of something I had been contemplating throughout this journey. It's not about being enough, I replied slowly. Their perception, or anyone else's, no longer defines my sense of value. That's the real transformation. She nodded, understanding. The external validation is just confirmation of what you already knew. Exactly. Though I wouldn't have been able to articulate that 10 years ago. As dinner concluded, Emma insisted on walking me back to my hotel, despite the light rain that had begun to fall. As we strolled through Cambridge's historic streets, she linked her arm through mine, a gesture of sisterly affection that would have seemed impossible during our carefully distanced adolescence. I have a confession, she said as we paused. At a crosswalk. When you first started getting recognition for your work, a tiny part of me was jealous. You? Jealous of me? The admission was so unexpected I almost laughed. Not of your specific accomplishments, she clarified, but of how your work seemed to have such immediate, tangible impact. My research is largely theoretical. It's practical. Applications might not be realized for decades. Watching you transform actual systems, seeing the direct effects of your innovations. It made me question whether I had chosen the right path. The vulnerability in her admission moved me deeply. Our paths serve different purposes, I told her. Your work explores possibilities that might not be implemented for years, but when they are, they'll enable transformations we can't yet imagine. Mine addresses immediate needs but builds on theoretical foundations others have established. She squeezed my arm gently. The Martinez sisters, covering both the long and short game. Exactly. The world needs both. We reached my hotel, pausing under the awning as the rain intensified. When's your birthday celebration? I asked. 2 weeks from Saturday. I know it's short notice with your schedule. I'll be there, I assured her. Some things take priority. The birthday? Celebration at the Martinez family home in Ridgeview was unlike any family gathering I could remember. My parents had invited not just extended family, but former teachers who had supported me, neighbors who had followed my career, and even a few former classmates who had remained in our hometown. The living room had been transformed, with a timeline of photographs and news clippings chronicling my journey from childhood science projects to the National Energy Committee appointment. Each stage was carefully labeled in my mother's precise handwriting, including projects and achievements I had assumed they had never noticed. As I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and catching up with faces from my past, I noted the absence of the tension that had historically characterized my visits home. There was no comparison to Emma's accomplishments, no subtle undermining of my approaches or choices. Instead, there was a genuine celebration of the specific path I had forged. My father found me as I was examining a photograph I hadn't seen in years. My 12-year-old self standing beside a science fair project on alternative energy collection. You redesigned the solar panels, he recalled, surprising me with his specific memory. The judges said your approach was impractical, but you insisted the conventional design was inefficient. I did, I confirmed, touched that he remembered. This detail. They gave me an honorable mention, but said my ideas weren't grounded in established principles. Turns out you were ahead of your time, he said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't see it then. The simple acknowledgement held more meaning than any elaborate speech could have conveyed. Thank you, Dad. Later, as cake was served, my mother insisted on making a toast. I prepared myself for the kind of generic celebration parents typically offer, proud but vague, loving but lacking true understanding of the specific nature of one's accomplishments. Instead, she surprised me. When Alexandra was in 3rd grade, she began, her teacher called us in for a conference. She told us Alex asked too many questions, challenged too many assumptions. She suggested we might need to help her adapt to traditional learning approaches. My mother paused, her expression reflective. What I wish I had understood then, what we all should have recognized, was that those questions and challenges weren't problems to be corrected. They were early signs of a mind that could see possibilities others missed. She raised her glass. To Alexandra, who taught me that there are many forms of intelligence, many paths to contribution, and many ways to change the world. I couldn't be prouder of the path you chose and the determination with which you followed it. The room echoed with agreement as glasses were raised. I caught Emma's eye across the room, her smile reflecting my own mixture of surprise and appreciation at our mother's unexpected insight. After the celebration, as guests were departing, Mrs. Hernandez, my former math teacher, approached with a younger woman I didn't immediately recognize. Alexandra, do you remember my daughter Lucia? The young woman smiled shyly. We were in the same grade, but I was pretty quiet back then. Memory clicked into place. Lucia Hernandez, who had sat near the back of most classes, rarely participating but always observing. Of course, I said. How are you, Lucia? I'm teaching now, she replied. Special education, focusing on twice exceptional students, kids who are both gifted and have learning differences. Mrs. Hernandez beamed with obvious pride. Lucia's developing new teaching approaches specifically for students with dyslexia and ADHD who show advanced thinking in areas like engineering and mathematics. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. Those students need champions who understand their potential. Lucia hesitated, then added, Your story has been significant for me professionally. I actually use articles about your work with my students. Examples of how different cognitive approaches can lead to innovation. The idea that my journey was helping shape educational approaches for a new generation of unconventional thinkers was profoundly moving. I'd love to hear more about your work, I told her. Perhaps I could visit your classroom sometime when I'm in town. Her face lit up. My students would be absolutely thrilled. As the last guests departed and only family remained, I found myself surrounded by the physical artifacts of my journey, photographs, newspaper clippings, awards, and mementos carefully preserved by my parents. Emma joined me as I examined a particularly old science fair ribbon. Remember when we were convinced we had to compete for attention? She asked quietly. As if there was only room for one successful Martinez daughter, I recalled. And now look at us. Collaborative rather than competitive. We just needed to outgrow the narrow frameworks we were given, I reflected, to recognize that success isn't a single path or a zero-sum game. Emma nodded. Our parents did the best they could with the understanding they had. We all did. Her perspective wasn't excusing the limitations that had been placed on us, but rather acknowledging the contextual reality in which we had all operated, a reality shaped by conventional thinking about intelligence, success, and potential. As I prepared to return to Washington the next day, my mother handed me a small package. I meant to give this to you during the party, but it felt too personal for a crowd. Inside was a delicate silver pendant, a Mobius strip formed into a graceful loop. It's beautiful, I said, lifting it from the box. The jeweler explained that a Mobius strip has only one side and one edge, she told me. It looks like it has boundaries, but it doesn't. It's continuous. It reminded me of how you've always refused to accept artificial limitations. The thoughtfulness of the gift, not just the object itself, but the symbolism she had attached to it, revealed how deeply she had come to understand my journey. Thank you, I said simply, unable to articulate the fullness of my appreciation. As my car pulled away from the family home, I found myself reflecting on the nature of validation and recognition. For so many years, I had craved acknowledgement from my family, had sought their understanding as if it were the ultimate confirmation of my worth. Now, having received that acknowledgement in fuller measure than I had ever anticipated, I recognized that its value lay not in defining my capabilities but in healing old wounds. The true validation had never been external. It had been in the quiet moments of perseverance, in the courage to trust my unconventional perspectives, in the willingness to forge a path that others couldn't yet see. The most significant transformation hadn't been in how others perceived me, but in how I had come to understand my own unique value. Back in Washington, immersed in the complex work of redesigning national energy infrastructure, I wore my mother's pendant during particularly challenging negotiations, a reminder that apparent boundaries often prove illusory when approached from a different perspective. The committee work progressed through inevitable obstacles, political complications, and technical challenges, gradually building momentum toward implementation. 6 months into the process, during a presentation to energy sector executives, I encountered a familiar face, Tyler Reynolds, now heading a major regional utility company. He approached afterward, hand extended in professional greeting. "Alexandra Martinez," he said, his tone carefully calibrated between personal and professional. "Your committee's proposals are ambitious." "They're necessary," I corrected mildly, "and implementable with the right partnerships." "That's actually why I wanted to speak with you," he admitted. "Reynolds Energy is interested in serving as a pilot implementation site for the adaptive distribution model. Your work at Verdant has proven the concept more thoroughly than I initially thought possible." Coming from the man who had once dismissed my ideas as cute but impractical, this represented a significant concession. "I'm glad to see the data has been persuasive," I replied, choosing professional graciousness over the personal satisfaction of reminding him of his earlier skepticism. As we discussed the technical requirements for pilot implementation, I reflected on how thoroughly the narrative had shifted, not just within my family, but across the industry. The approaches once considered radical were now being embraced by the very institutions that had initially rejected them. The thinking once labeled as disruptive or unfocused was now recognized as innovative and visionary. That evening, I called Maya, who had recently been promoted to lead Verdant's implementation team for municipal projects. "How are things in Seattle?" I asked. "Evolving rapidly," she reported. "The newest cohort of fellows has been integrating machine learning into the adaptive prediction models. Their approach is fascinating, using pattern recognition to anticipate consumption shifts before they register in the traditional metrics." I smiled at the description. Another generation of unconventional thinkers pushing boundaries, challenging assumptions, seeing connections that others missed. "That's exactly what we need." "Oh, and Professor Wilson stopped by the office yesterday," she added. "He wanted to discuss incorporating Verdant's case studies into a new graduate course on innovative approaches to energy distribution. He asked me to tell you that your scenic route has become the main highway." The reference to my former professor's metaphor brought a wave of appreciation for the rare educators who had recognized potential in unusual places, who had provided crucial support when conventional systems had failed to accommodate different types of minds. As I ended the call, I gazed out at the Washington Monument illuminated against the evening sky, thinking about the long arc that had brought me to this place. From a struggling student labeled as deficient to a nationally recognized innovator shaping infrastructure policy, the journey had been neither straight nor predictable. Yet in retrospect, every deviation and challenge had contributed essential elements to the perspective that now allowed me to envision systems differently. The very characteristics once considered limitations, my pattern-focused thinking, my resistance to conventional approaches, my persistent questioning of established methods, had become my greatest strengths. The headline that had once seemed so significant, "Parents always said, 'Your sister's the smart one,' until my name appeared in the news," now felt like a simplified caption for a much richer story. The real narrative wasn't about proving my intelligence to my family or competing with my sister for recognition. It was about expanding definitions of brilliance, about creating space for different cognitive approaches, about transforming limitations into innovations. As I prepared for the next day's committee meeting, I reflected on the message I hoped my journey might convey to others following unconventional paths: that different isn't deficient, that the minds that challenge existing frameworks are often the ones that create new possibilities, that the most significant contributions sometimes come from those who refuse to accept that something cannot be done simply because it hasn't been done before. And perhaps most importantly, that true validation comes not from external recognition, but from the quiet certainty of knowing your own worth, and from using your unique perspective to illuminate paths that others have yet to see. The implementation of the National Energy Infrastructure Initiative's first phase exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Efficiency gains in the initial pilot regions averaged 43%, significantly higher than the 30% we had projected. Energy accessibility improved across rural communities that had previously experienced frequent disruptions. Most importantly, the adaptive nature of the system had proven its value during an unexpected hurricane season, automatically rerouting resources to affected areas without the prolonged outages that would have occurred under the conventional infrastructure. Senator Wilkins was ecstatic. "The data speaks for itself," she declared during the quarterly review meeting. "This is the most significant infrastructure advancement since the original power grid was established." I should have been riding high on the success, but something felt incomplete. Despite the professional achievements, the national recognition, the undeniable impact of my work, the validation from institutions that had once dismissed my approaches, I found myself increasingly restless. The endless meetings, the political maneuvering, the compromise required to move initiatives through bureaucratic channels, all of it was draining the creative energy that had fueled my best innovations. Late one evening, as I packed up to leave my Washington office, my phone rang with Emma's distinctive ringtone. "You sound exhausted," she observed after just a few words of greeting. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. "Just finishing a long day of meetings." "Alex?" my sister said, her tone shifting to the no-nonsense directness we had developed in our adult relationship. "I've heard that 'I'm fine' from you before. What's really going on?" I sank into my office chair, suddenly too tired to maintain the facade. "Success is supposed to feel better than this, isn't it?" "Ah," she said softly. "The be careful what you wish for phenomenon." "It's not that I'm not grateful," I clarified quickly. "The committee work is important. The changes we're implementing will impact millions of lives. It's just that you're an innovator at heart, not an administrator, Emma." Completed my thought. "And right now, you're doing much more administrating than innovating." Her assessment hit with such precision that I laughed despite my fatigue. "When did you get so insightful about my inner workings?" "Around the same time you stopped competing with me and I stopped feeling threatened by you," she replied lightly. "So, what are you going to do about it?" It was such a simple question, yet it crystallized the nebulous discontent I had been feeling. "I don't know," I admitted. "Walking away from this position feels irresponsible. The work matters." "No, one's suggesting abandonment," Emma countered. "But there's more than one way to contribute. You built Verdant because traditional structures couldn't accommodate your vision. Maybe it's time to rethink how you engage with this national initiative too." Our conversation continued late into the evening, exploring possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider. By the time we hung up, a seed of an idea had begun to form. Not abandonment of the national work, but transformation of my role within it. The next morning, I requested a private meeting with Senator Wilkins. When we met in her office later that week, I laid out a proposal that had solidified over days of careful consideration. The implementation phase is proceeding effectively, I began. But the true potential of an adaptive system lies in continuous innovation. Right now, too much of my focus is on administrative oversight rather than advancing the technological framework. The senator studied me carefully. You're proposing a change to your role. I am, I confirmed. I believe I can contribute more effectively by establishing an innovation laboratory within the initiative, a dedicated team focused on next generation advancements while the current implementation continues under existing leadership. Essentially, you want to step back from day-to-day management to focus on forward-looking development, she summarized. Not stepping back, redirecting, I clarified. The current phase needs someone skilled in implementation logistics. My strengths have always been in seeing beyond conventional approaches to identify new possibilities. Senator Wilkins considered the proposal thoughtfully. The success we've seen so far has earned you considerable latitude, she acknowledged, and I'd rather have you contributing in your area of greatest strength than losing your involvement entirely. With her conditional approval, I began structuring the Energy Innovation Laboratory, a semi-autonomous entity within the national initiative that would focus on development 3 to 5 years ahead of current implementation. I secured dedicated funding, assembled a team of unconventional thinkers from diverse disciplines, and established a physical space in Seattle that would allow me to reconnect with Verdant while maintaining my government role. 3 months into the new arrangement, I had relocated my primary workspace back to Seattle, dividing my time between Verdant, the Innovation Laboratory, and regular trips to Washington for key meetings. The mental fog that had settled over me during my full-time administrative role began to lift, replaced by the familiar electricity of creative problem-solving. The Innovation Lab quickly became known for its unconventional approach. We established virtual reality environments that allowed engineers to visualize energy flow through complex distribution networks. We developed predictive models that incorporated not just consumption patterns but social, economic, and environmental factors affecting energy needs. Perhaps most significantly, we integrated several Martinez Fellows into the team, ensuring that neurodivergent perspectives remained central to our development process. The expanded approach yielded unexpected opportunities. Universities began incorporating our models into their engineering and economics curricula. International delegations visited the lab to explore adaptations for their own national infrastructures. The Martinez Fellowship expanded to include economics and public policy tracks alongside the technical focus. During this period of intense innovation, I received a surprising call from Ridgeview High School's current principal, a woman named Sophia Carter, who had been several years behind me in school. "We're renovating our main academic building," she explained after initial pleasantries, "and the school board has approved naming it after distinguished alumni. Your name is at the top of our list." The irony wasn't lost on me. The institution where I had struggled to fit conventional learning models now wanted to memorialize my success. "I'm honored," I told her, "but I have a counter-proposal. Instead of the Alexandra Martinez Science Center, I suggested they might consider the Neurodiversity Innovation Lab, a space specifically designed to nurture students with unconventional thinking styles. With funding from the Martinez Foundation, we could create adaptable learning environments, specialized resources, and connections to university and industry partners interested in diverse cognitive approaches. That's a significant departure from a traditional naming," Principal Carter noted carefully. "It is," I agreed, "but which would have greater impact, my name on a building, or resources that might help identify and nurture the next generation of unconventional thinkers?" She didn't require much convincing. 2 months later, I returned to Ridgeview for the groundbreaking ceremony of what would become the school's first dedicated space for neurodivergent education. As I drove through my hometown, I was struck by how simultaneously familiar and foreign it felt. The physical landmarks unchanged, but my perception of them completely transformed. The ceremony itself was well attended. Current students, faculty, school board members, and community leaders gathered on the field where construction would soon begin. Several of my former teachers were present, including Mrs. Hernandez and her daughter Lucia, who had been instrumental in developing the educational framework for the new center. As I approached the podium to speak, I caught sight of my parents seated in the front row, my father recording the event on his phone with undisguised pride. Emma had flown in from Cambridge, taking a rare break from her research to support this milestone. When I was a student here, I began, I struggled to fit within traditional educational models. My thinking didn't follow expected patterns. My approaches to problems often seemed circuitous or impractical. Many well-intentioned educators tried to help me adapt to the system. I paused, meeting the gazes of several former teachers. What we know now is that sometimes the system needs to adapt to different types of minds. I gestured toward the marked ground where construction would begin. This center isn't about accommodating deficits. It's about recognizing that neurodiversity, different patterns of thinking, learning, and processing, represents a form of cognitive biodiversity essential for human advancement. Some of history's most transformative innovations have come from minds that processed information differently, that saw connections others missed, that questioned assumptions others accepted. Looking out at the assembled students, I continued, to those of you who have been told your thinking is too different, your questions too numerous, your approaches too unconventional, consider that these very qualities, properly channeled, may become your greatest strengths. Different isn't deficient. Different is essential. The applause that followed was gratifying, but the real impact came afterward, as current students approached to share their experiences, their struggles with traditional education, their relief at finding validation for their thinking styles, their hope that the new center might provide the support they needed to develop their unique potential. One young woman, a sophomore named Zia, spoke with particular intensity. My counselor showed us videos of your talks, she told me. It was the first time I'd seen someone describe exactly how my brain works, seeing patterns everywhere, making connections others think are random, struggling with sequence but excelling at systems thinking. How are your classes going? I asked, recognizing in her the familiar mixture of intelligence and frustration that had characterized my own academic experience. Most of them are still hard, she admitted. Except physics and computer science, where the teachers let me explore problems my own way instead of forcing specific methods. That was my experience too, I told her. The subjects didn't change. The approach to teaching them did. As we continued talking, I learned that Zia had already developed an innovative approach to optimizing the school's internal communication system, a project that had been dismissed by some teachers as beyond the scope of standard curriculum, but championed by her computer science teacher. Would you be interested in shadowing one of our junior engineers at the Innovation Lab sometime? I offered, seeing how different thinking styles contribute in a professional environment might be valuable. Her face lit with excitement. Really? That would be amazing. After finalizing arrangements with her teachers, I rejoined my family, who had been watching the interaction from a distance. You just changed that girl's life, my mother observed quietly. I just gave her what I wish someone had given me, at her age, I corrected. Recognition that her different approach has value. Emma nodded in agreement. The validation that you're not broken, just tuned to a different frequency. As we left the ceremony, walking toward the car through Ridgeview's familiar streets, I found myself reflecting on the long, circuitous path that had led to this moment. From a struggling student labeled as deficient to a national innovator, creating space for others like me, the journey had been neither direct nor easy. Yet every challenge, every dismissal, every moment of being underestimated had contributed to the perspective that now allowed me to envision systems differently. not just technological systems, but educational ones, economic ones, social ones. The very experiences that had once seemed like obstacles had become the foundation for transformation far beyond what I could have imagined during those difficult school years. 6 months later, I received notification that my work through the Energy Innovation Laboratory had been nominated for the Global Innovation Prize, one of the highest recognitions for transformative approaches addressing complex challenges at the intersection of technology, society, and human potential. The nomination cited not just the adaptive energy framework, but the broader ecosystem of innovation I had helped create. The fellowship program nurturing neurodivergent thinkers, the educational initiatives expanding conceptions of intelligence, the implementation methodologies integrating diverse knowledge systems. It represented recognition not of a single achievement, but of a comprehensive approach to transformation. The award ceremony, held at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, brought together innovators from diverse fields: renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, educational reform, public health, technological accessibility. As I listened to their stories, I was struck by a common thread. Many described journeys that had begun with being underestimated, with thinking differently from established norms, with seeing possibilities where others perceived limitations. When my name was announced as the recipient, the citation highlighted this connection explicitly. Alexandra Martinez has transformed not just energy distribution systems, but our understanding of innovation itself, demonstrating that the minds most likely to create revolutionary solutions are often those that process information differently, that question assumptions, that forge unexpected connections. Accepting the award, I found myself reflecting on the long path that had led to this moment, from a child labeled as deficient to a global innovator recognized for transformative impact. The journey had been neither direct nor easy, yet each challenge had contributed essential elements to the perspective that now allowed me to envision systems differently. This recognition represents the culmination of a journey that began with limitation, I acknowledged in my acceptance speech. As a child struggling in traditional educational systems, I was defined by what I couldn't do rather than by the unique ways I processed information. That experience of having my different thinking style pathologized rather than valued informed my understanding of how systems often fail to recognize diverse forms of intelligence and contribution. I gestured toward the diverse innovators gathered in the hall. Many transformative insights come from minds that process information differently, that see patterns others miss, that question assumptions others accept, that connect domains others separate. Yet our systems often marginalize these perspectives, measuring intelligence and potential against standardized metrics that capture only narrow bands of human capability. As I concluded, I offered the insight that had become central to my approach. The future of innovation depends not just on technological advancement, but on expanding our conception of intelligence itself, creating space for different types of minds to contribute their unique perspectives. When we value cognitive diversity as essential to human advancement, we unlock solutions to our most complex challenges. The standing ovation that followed was gratifying, but the real impact came afterward, as individuals approached to share how the message had resonated with their own experiences, of thinking differently, of struggling to be understood, of finding ways to translate their unique perspectives into contributions others could value. A young engineer from Brazil described developing water purification systems based on patterns observed in natural systems, an approach initially dismissed as impractical, but eventually proven more effective than conventional methods. A mathematician from India shared how her synesthetic perception of numbers had led to breakthrough algorithms in data analysis. An agricultural innovator from Kenya explained how his hyperactive attention, once considered problematic, allowed him to notice subtle environmental indicators others missed. Each story reinforced what had become increasingly clear throughout my journey: that different wasn't deficient, that diverse cognitive styles represented essential elements of human innovation. that many of our most significant advancements emerged from minds that processed information in unconventional ways. After the ceremony, amidst congratulations and discussions with other innovators, my phone vibrated with a text from Emma. "So proud of you. Mom and Dad are literally showing your live stream to everyone at their country club. How the tables have turned." I smiled at her message, appreciating both her support and the gentle humor acknowledging how thoroughly perceptions had shifted. Yet as I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this global recognition, I realized that the most significant transformation hadn't been in how others perceived me. It had been in how I had come to understand the value of my different cognitive style. The headline that had once seemed to define my story, "Parents always said, 'Your sister's the smart one,' until my name appeared in the news," now felt like a simplistic snapshot of a much more nuanced journey. The real narrative wasn't about proving my intelligence to my family or competing with my sister for recognition. It was about expanding conceptions of intelligence itself, about creating space for different types of minds to contribute their unique insights, about transforming limitations into innovations. 2 weeks after returning from Paris, I found myself back in Ridgeview for a family dinner. A quieter celebration than the formal ceremony, but somehow more meaningful. Emma had flown in from Cambridge, bringing news of her latest research, breakthrough. My parents had prepared my favorite childhood dishes, a gesture that carried more significance than elaborate praise. As we gathered around the dining table, the same table where, years earlier, comparisons between Emma's academic achievements and my struggling performance had been commonplace, the conversation flowed with an ease that would have seemed impossible during those earlier days. "I was thinking about your UNESCO speech," my father said as we finished dessert. "That part about different cognitive styles being essential to innovation rather than problems to be fixed." I nodded, curious, where his thoughts were leading. "It made me remember something from when you were very young. Maybe 5 or 6, he continued. "The washing machine broke down, and I was trying to figure out what was wrong with it. You kept asking questions I thought were irrelevant, about the water patterns, about the sounds it made before stopping. I remember being frustrated by what seemed like distractions." He shook his head slightly, the memory clearly still vivid. "But then you said something like, 'It sounds different at the beginning than at the end.'" And that observation, which I had completely missed because I was focused on the mechanical parts, led us directly to the timing mechanism, which was the actual problem. The anecdote surprised me. I had no recollection of the incident, and my father had never mentioned it before. "I didn't understand then," he admitted, "that your different way of processing information, noticing patterns I missed, making connections I didn't see, wasn't a distraction, but a different kind of intelligence. I wish I had recognized it sooner." My mother reached across the table, briefly touching my hand. "We're still learning," she said simply, "but we're trying to see differently now." In that moment, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with global recognition or professional achievement, a healing of old wounds through genuine understanding rather than mere acknowledgement of success. The validation that had once seemed so crucial from my family now felt like a natural evolution in our shared journey, rather than the defining goal it had once been. Later that evening, as Emma and I sat on the back porch of our childhood home, watching fireflies illuminate the summer darkness, she asked a question that captured something essential about our parallel journeys. "Do you ever wonder who we might have become if we hadn't been cast in those roles so early? You as the struggling one, me as the naturally gifted one?" I considered her question thoughtfully. "I think we would have arrived at similar places eventually, but perhaps with less emotional turbulence along the way. Your analytical brilliance and my pattern recognition were inherent to how our minds work. The labels just complicated our relationship to those natural strengths." She nodded slowly. "The irony is that we needed both approaches all along. Your ability to see unconventional connections and my ability to analyze them systematically. We could have been collaborators instead of being positioned as comparative data points. We got there eventually, I pointed out with a smile. Just took the scenic route. The scenic route, she repeated, laughing softly. That's exactly what your teachers used to say about your problem-solving methods. Alexandra always takes the scenic route to the answer. And now that scenic route has become a legitimate methodology, I observed. Maybe that's the real story here. Not that different thinking eventually gets recognized, but that it opens paths that standardized approaches might never discover. As I prepared to return to Seattle the next day, ready to continue developing next-generation adaptive systems through the Innovation Laboratory, I carried with me a deeper understanding of my journey's significance, not just for my personal growth or professional impact, but for expanding conceptions of intelligence and potential. The real revolution wasn't in proving my worth to others or securing external validation, but in recognizing that different wasn't deficient, that diverse cognitive styles were essential elements of human advancement, that our most transformative solutions often emerged from minds that processed information in unconventional ways. And in that recognition lay perhaps the most significant insight of all, that the greatest limitation we face isn't in our different ways of thinking, but in how narrowly we define intelligence itself. By expanding that definition, creating space for diverse minds to contribute their unique perspectives, we unlock possibilities that standardized thinking might never discover. As I continued my work, developing adaptive systems that transformed energy distribution globally, nurturing neurodivergent thinkers through the fellowship program, advocating for educational approaches that recognized diverse forms of brilliance. This insight remained central to every dimension of my contribution, not just improving technological frameworks, but expanding our understanding of human potential itself. That expansion, more than any award or recognition, represented the true legacy of my journey. From being underestimated to creating systems that valued difference, from seeking validation to recognizing my unique worth, from struggling against limitations to transforming them into innovations that illuminated paths others had yet to see. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.